Video is being recorded on the evening of Tuesday, October 10th, 2023. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it. Thank you. In this video, I'm going to talk about a historical comparison for silver. This is something I believe I published and recorded a video about this at some point in the last year, but I've been thinking about the ongoing bear market in precious metals and history, and because the gold price was fixed until 1971, it's hard to make those comparisons. Gold stock's really the proxy for gold, so silver has that clean history, although it's not perfect, but going back decades and decades. Okay, so in this chart, in the blue is silver, and in the black is silver against the stock market, you can see. And here we have the CPI at the bottom. So starting with the CPI you could see had this breakout in, at the end of the 60s, or in the, it had this mini breakout here, 65. More significant breakout here, it looks like in the end of 67 or into 68. Then it continued to rise. Then the Fed hiked rates fairly aggressively. And then, there was a recession. Then inflation came down. And I've talked about it before. There are some similarities between that period and today. And so, recently, in recent years, we had this huge breakout in inflation, of course. The Fed is having to tighten policy in a way that they really haven't had to since the early 80s. And there wasn't quite the same, length of time, between them starting to tighten significantly and going back to when they did it before. Because here it was, this was the first time they were really tightening significantly in a while. Because basically we had QE in the 50s until 1951. So, but there is a similar comparison. I mean, since that point, the first real hiking cycle, first real significant hiking cycle in, decades, really. So that's where we are. And if you look at what happened here, I marked this with a vertical line. This was just the peak in inflation. And silver, and gold stocks too, this is silver, right? It peaked, almost 2 years before the CPI did. And with respect to where we are now, so the peak was in the summer of 2020 in terms of silver and precious metals. And then the peak in inflation, it looks like, when was that? Early 22. So not quite the same length of time, but still there was a lag. But that, it's just interesting to me how that's similar. And this bear market in silver, this lasted early 68 through 71. Of course, you had gold stocks that are recovered. I think after 1970, they started to recover. Then, the end of 71, you remove the gold standard. But anyway, silver. So this was a 3.5 year plus bear market in silver. Silver went down 51%. And so here in black, this is silver against the stock market. So I'm not saying it's the exact same situation, but at the end of the 60s and the early 70s, look at where silver was against the stock market. Silver in real term. If I did silver against total return bonds, that could be another video, but it's probably just as depressed. So the point is, silver, before it had this fantastic move, this was really, 30 or 40x in basically 8 years. But, back to the black line, I went and I looked at this during the Great Depression, and these lows here at the end of 61 and the end of 71, the silver against the stock market, these lows were just a tad lower than the Great Depression low. So you could make an argument here. It's like, yeah, inflation's already broken out. The Fed tightened. There was a recession, so inflation came back. But silver in real terms here in 1972 was, almost like potentially at an all-time low relative to the stock market. But, of course, if you're looking at the ratio chart, this was turned out to be a significant bottom. I mean, it held the support. And then, of course, the 35x or 40x in 8 years, whatever it was. But anyway, getting back to where we are here and now, I mean, I make the point repeatedly, you got to have the stock market go into a secular bear. And, that's when precious metals are really going to fly, and for a long time. And we're not there yet. And you can see, I mean, silver against the stock market here in the last 5-6 years, it had this move here, but it's given that all back. It's still struggling here. So, I mean, this is potentially, if you were to see silver come down here to, I think this is just below 19. I mean, you can see, look here, there's significant confluence of support here, just below 18. But, call it 19. So if you see silver come down to 19, and if you were to see the S&P continuing to rally, I don't have the figures off the top of my head, but you could see something like this. I mean, it doesn't mean it's going to come all the way here and make this massive historic double bottom. But, I mean, you could see something like this if precious metals are going to sell off and make a major bottom at some point, over the next quarter or two. You could see something like this. And, of course, that would, and this would come with, the economy rolling over, you have a bear market in the stock market, and then, you're in stagflation territory and the Fed has to ease policy, because we're in a recession. That's when precious metals will really start to fly. So you could potentially have it play out, something like this. So that's what I'm looking at. But, I mean, the main takeaway here is, there's inflation expectations are still a problem. We just got out of this, or we're still really in. I mean, we're in a new inflationary secular world, potentially. Of course, there's going to be ebbs and flows. But we're in this world, statistical inflation has come down. The Fed is still, I mean, they're probably done hiking. The second tightest cycle in terms of Fed hiking ever since the early 80s. And so there's a lot of similarities to here, because you could have the same sentiment. Like, well, inflation, we had this huge breakout in inflation. It's come back a little bit. We're in a recession. Silver had this move up, but, in real terms, silver is like the cheapest it's ever been, down 50% off its high. And then look what happened over the next 8 years. So I'm not saying we're going to see an exact repeat of that, but in real terms, we're in a very similar situation. So just bear that in mind. But of course, I mean, look, we know it's an issue of timing. Tell me when the stock market rolls over, goes into a real bear market, and to tell me when we're going to have to ease policy and stagflation is going to be an issue, economy's in recession, all that. That's when you're going to see the start of a huge move like we had in the early 70s. So I know I'm droning on here, but there's a lot of similarities with respect to silver between today and, the late 60s to early 70s. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you so much for tuning in. Talk to you guys again in the next video.